Let me begin by saying that the current content of this video is much shorter than what appears. The reason for the apparent lengthy time is that I've attached 2 prior videos to the back end, and these were videos I put together and published in May of 2019, around the time Biden was announcing his candidacy for president. You can actually find these videos from 2019 if you search for Biden, and if you don't see them right away, just hit the show all button and they'll be right there. But you can also look at them here at the conclusion of what I'm about to say, and they are interesting if you want to see the astrological dynamics, because there's a lot of juicy stuff in there around transits and progressions. In terms of the current scenario for Joe Biden, the key transits that jump out, so to speak, would be first and foremost Saturn in early Aquarius. It is squaring his 6th sign Moon, and this is keeping him hemmed in and unable to get much traction in terms of externalizing himself and having a bit more influence. This is, in large part due to the coronavirus situation, because once again we see the health sign in a person's chart when he's running for a big job like this, showing up as a national concern instead of his own. However, it is his own health house, so it's actually a pretty smart idea to stay self-contained, because he would be putting his health at risk if he were to take chances. This moon is in the health house. It is a strong moon. It's in the sign of his exaltation, but it's getting a square from Pluto. So far better to be cautious, and I think he's doing the right thing in that sense. But now Saturn will be here in early Aquarius until July, whereupon it will return back into Capricorn and eventually station from the 25th degree, while in Aquarius the restrictive period will continue in some sense, but starting early July the situation changes, and you're likely to see him at that point coming forth in a more public way, and just in general being able to present himself with far less restrictions. The other interesting thing that is happening here is this recent story we've heard about around sexual assault allegations from the early 90s, and this is related to Mars transiting through degrees where it squares itself in the 12th house. And if the 12th house is a house of secrets, a house of hidden love affairs, and Mars is not only living, so to speak, in that house, but it also rules it, and it also rules the 5th, which is another house connected to such matters. And it doesn't tell you whether or not he actually did it, and even whether or not it's going to gain traction and become a real problem for him. I can't really answer that, although my best guess is that it probably won't cause him harm, or much harm at least, because of the overall strength of all the other transits in this chart. I suspect that a couple of things could happen. One could be that it just disappears over the next while as a result of Mars itself, which is a fairly fast-moving planet moving away from these degrees. But it could hang around longer too, because Mars will continue squaring from Aquarius, will continue squaring the other Scorpio planets, and you could even tie it a bit to Saturn and take it all the way into early July, since Saturn is squaring the Moon links it to the 8th, which is another sex house. So that's a possibility. Best guess, it's probably a matter of weeks, but we'll have to see. And that's it for now. If you're interested, the other videos follow immediately after this one. So what are Biden's chances for winning the Democratic nomination, and especially for becoming president, his transits are actually quite good, because you see Jupiter currently in the sign of his ascendant, which is always a very powerful, very helpful alignment. And then you also see Uranus conjoining his moon, which is another boost of energy. And then we have the Neptune in Pisces is in trine to his Scorpio planets. And Neptune is a really important planet from the perspective of popularity. In fact, Trump was elected on Neptune trine in 2016. Neptune was trining his Mercury. And at the moment, Neptune is hovering around 16, 17, 18 Pisces, so it's in the middle of these planets, and it moves toward a trine to Mercury as we go toward the election. And Mercury is a really important planet because it is the ruler of his 10th house, his zenith and his midheaven. Now keep in mind, the way I draw charts, it is shown as an equal house chart, but I actually use whole sign when I'm reading it. So all of these planets here are actually in the 12th sign. The ascendant is Sagittarius, the 10th is Virgo, the 9th is Leo, the 8th is Cancer. I like drawing it this way because it highlights the degrees of the ascendant, and those degrees tend to be the most potent point of each of the houses when divided in this way. Now, what is interesting about Biden's chart is that in addition to helpful transits, you see an effect that is quite common when people are elected, when presidents are elected, because typically they need good supporting energies while they're running for office, but then once they're in office, it usually gets more difficult. And here we see Trump with Jupiter in his ascendant, and now as he goes toward the election, what's going to happen is there'll be a point when Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto are in this region here, basically opposing his Jupiter, but at the same time sextiling the Scorpio planets. It's almost impossible to achieve anything without something challenging, and so the opposition of these planets to Jupiter is what it is for Joe. And it is an important aspect in that Jupiter is the ruler of his ascendant, ruler of Sagittarius, but it's a very strong Jupiter. Jupiter was 8 days, 7.9 days past its previous station, whereupon it went retrograde. So this planet is moving very slowly at his birth and is therefore very powerful. It's also in Cancer, which is the sign of its exaltation. And notice that it's trine, Mercury, trine the Sun, trine Venus. Very, very strong Jupiter. So it can withstand an attack by these planets. And in fact, the planets in those positions may act as more of a stimulant because from there they support his Scorpio planets. So I see his transits as a very, very good setup for the run-up to the election. However, if he did get elected president, by then you see Saturn and Jupiter, they actually will conjoin in early Aquarius, very early Aquarius, and then Saturn makes its tour of Aquarius during what would be the first 2.5, 3 years of his presidency. That makes perfect sense, because once you're president, then the pressure begins, and Saturn then would be squaring the sign where his Scorpio planets are, which makes perfect sense. Now, if we turn to his progressions, we see supporting energy or supporting factors that are very interesting as well. So please watch that video for that part of the analysis. Here we have Joe Biden's progressions, and the most important factor is the progress Sun, progress Moon conjunction, which is something that happens every 30 years or so. Therefore, it is deeply significant and is indicative of an important new cycle happening in his life, and it's also approximately coincident with when he declared his run for president. In fact, he waited and waited, and when these two are approximately conjunct is when he declared. I think that's very meaningful. And notice that they're next to the traveling progressed Aquarius ascendant, and that the part of fortune is nearby as well. All of this is very, very positive. Moreover, Aquarius is the sign of the US moon, which is helpful in terms of projecting his image, and having a Sagittarius ascendant at birth, which we know from his natal chart, is also helpful since the US ascendant is Sagittarius as well. So then further factors would be that when you look at a progressed chart, you can also look at it as an independent chart, and the transits do have some effect to this chart, not as much as to the natal chart, but something to take into account. And we notice that with Aquarius rising and all the planets in Aquarius, Jupiter and Saturn will be going through here post the election, and Jupiter in that sense is especially indicative of something very fortunate and powerful happening. You also notice that Mercury, which is the ruler of his natal midheaven zenith, is at 25 degrees Capricorn, and this is where Pluto and Saturn and Jupiter are going to go through. This is, again, a very, very powerful energetic alignment that is going to help him. And now perhaps the most interesting factors are related to looking at where these progressions are at these year points in his life. And you notice that in 2020, Mercury is going to go direct. And if you were to look back, it's been, since 1999, it's been retrograde. And it'll go direct in these degrees. Given that this planet is his zenith midheaven ruler, I would consider that very, very powerful and very important. Stationary moments make planets extremely intense and powerful. Of course, sometimes in a negative way, but I would say that in this case, it's more likely to be positive. Now notice as well that he's had Saturn retrograde his whole life. This shows from 1990, but if you go all the way back to the beginning, in fact, you can see in his original chart here that Saturn is retrograde. So essentially, the whole life it's retrograde. It's retrograding, moving along, and now in 2020, it goes direct. Now, Saturn is the kind of planet that when it comes to assuming responsibility, taking on power, the idea of karma coming together and making something happen, it's a really important planet. And to me, this is another indicator of something extremely important happening in his life around this period. And notice further that Uranus as well, the year after, well, a couple of years, but we're in that range. In 2022, it's going direct. At minimum, it's moving very slowly, and essentially, in the years that we're in, it's already stationary. So those are three really important factors that, to my mind, support a feeling that Biden's chances for becoming president in 2020 are very, very good.